46 damage?
That's what he says.
Well, shoot. Well, that knocks me out. Sorry, bag of nails.
Okay, I'll cast Flame Strike on it.
He says there's only one hit point left, and that does it.
Perfect.
Alright. So, my character, the Lizardfolk, is going to pull out his favorite carving knife and approach the down tabaxi, sharpening it along the way.
I mean, you know I can heal him, right?
But we eats him, don't waste food.
But we should heal him.
Oh, that'd be great. Then we can continue talks of confusing most righteous this, most righteous that. Watch your face go red and ready for battle, because it's most righteous again. And most righteous one more time.
You make a great point.
So, we eats him?
It's only just.
There's a piece for Friend Bear.
Friend Bear does love a good, well-done steak.
I approach the body to carve it up for food, Brownie.
Wait, you guys are gonna eat me?
Dead tabaxi don't talk! I start at the thigh. His femurs will make excellent daggers.
The dark meat is the best part.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your corrupt overlord Shane.
And I'm Eric.
The special guest, and we'll call him a Firbolg expert for the time being.
Which is just wildly untrue, but it is true for today.
Our brand of professionalism. And so today, in case you couldn't catch on based on the cannibalism sketch, well, I guess it's not cannibalism since he wasn't one of us, but
Correct.
We are talking about how you roleplay Lizardfolk and Firbolgs, two of the races that were added with Volo's Guides of Monsters, and each one which gives some really special role-playing and some interesting mechanical opportunities when you're next D&D campaign. So I'll kind of start off with some of the things I noticed playing Lizardfolk. And one of the real cruxes of playing Lizardfolk is going to end up being figuring out how you want to play kind of the alien logic. Like whether you're a Firbolg, a dwarf, a human, an elf, you have some semblance of family, some sense of that mammal brain, that society, that caring empathy. But not if you're a reptile. And that's not to say you're inherently evil, but the logic and the way of thinking is just so different that it's not going to be comparable. Like one of the common complaints I know with some campaigns is, you know, I play an elf, I play a dwarf, I play a human, but I'm just playing me with different stats.
You're a standard human with different ears or height.
Exactly. That should never be the feeling when you are playing a Lizardfolk in a campaign.
You have to activate that true lizard brain that we all have deep inside.
Yup, that harsh logic. And so, you know, and I'm not going to be that guy who tells someone how to play their character with Lizardfolk. The whole point is that you are coming from a very, very different angle and perspective. And, you know, from the mechanical side, some simple stats, +2 Constitution, +1 Wisdom. It's a good bonus for racial bonus for your stats. If you're using the Tasha's rules, a lot of times I would probably change the +1 Wisdom for +1 Dex, because when I think Lizardfolk, I think survival, quick moving, adaptable. Even some of their special skills or abilities are based on dexterity, so just giving that a little extra bump just kind of makes sense.
Well, and deciding if you're going to be more of a Komodo dragon versus a gecko.
Yeah. Are you scrambling up the tree, or are you charging into battle? Either way, a little bit of extra agility actually kind of helps.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of the basic bullet points of that with the Lizardfolk, you know, no emotions, and that comes out in a lot of ways. There's no attachment admiration. You don't think of, there is no Lizardfolk hero because you don't have those emotions to lift one up. There's no friendship, there's no fear, there's just, oh, that's fearsome, let's avoid it if we can, because survival. That's kind of the base instinct. Oh, this group helps me survive, therefore I will contribute to the group. Or this group is full of idiots, I'm looking for a better group, which could explain how you go from a tribe of lizards who aren't doing well to your adventuring party. They're very logical minds with logic unaffected by morality or emotion, because once again, that's kind of a mammal thing.
Uh-huh.
Even when you go to the sense of pleasure, it says in Volos that the sense of pleasure is a big deal for them. That's not so much like, oh, look at this attractive mate, or look at this delicious food. It's, is this territory safe? Is there food? Is it not too cold? Are there predators? Or am I the biggest thing here? To them, that kind of banality is what they would consider pleasure. I'm safe here. Great. That's how kind of the reptile brain works. They're very cold and calculating, and it's all about utility and survival. What's useful and how they're going to go surviving. And I think figure out how to play that out is a major part of how you're going to play the Lizardfolk, because that's going to affect everything from actions to the classes you choose to how you interact with players at the table, which when you choose an off-type character like a Lizardfolk or a Firbolg, half the fun is how you interact with the table, right? No name?
Yeah, exactly. Both of them are races that very much build into playing your race type as your archetype on top of whatever your class or entire character design is. Building off of your swamp lizard brain, Firbolgs have a deep forest, fey trickster kind of thing built in, but not like a fairy. I mean, when you think about them, they're very similar to a dryad. The way I've described them is that they're giant, hairy dryad wannabes.
Yeah.
It is someone who can't meld into a tree normally, but would love to if you gave them the chance because they don't want you to know they're around. They're known as an actual giant folk, for one. They're not actually fey. They are giant. Their biggest thing is always going to be their big nose. Their big nose is what they're known for. Everyone draws it a different way, but that's what they're known for. They are hairy, but kind of like, an older man. They're not furry. Like, they're not covered in hair, but, they're going to have large patches on the back of their head.
Yeah.
They're going to have it on their arms, their legs. And they're usually, generally, not flesh tone. They can be, but they're usually a gray or a blue-gray. Yeah. When it comes to their stats, their age, all of that, they are a long-lived race. They are adults by the age of 30, but they usually live for up to 500 years. So they're old. They understand the length of trees because they've outlived some of them. The big thing about them is that they are large, but not actually. So your general Firbolg is between 7 to 8 feet. So
He'll get attention in a city, but they're not running away in terror because of the giant that just
exactly. They're not full giant, but they're taller than anyone else. For that as well, they do get the ability to have a carry capacity as if they were a large character, which, depending on your DM, may never come up, but it's that way to, hey, look, we're big and strong, even though it may not directly come across just because you're bigger.
And if you have groups like ours where those types of details do come up with a DM, that is a very useful one to pull out.
Correct. It is, even if you have, a guy who doesn't have as much strength, if he's a Firbolg, you can still give him the extra bag of stuff because he's going to be able to carry it.
Yep.
As far as stat boosts, they get a +2 to wisdom. They're generally wise. They also get a +1 to strength to aid into that whole leaning into the giant folk side. When it comes to their general race temperament, they're regularly neutral good. A rare outcome would be an actual evil Firbolg.
Yeah, it seems like the one thing that comes up again and again is they come from a kind of a family society or a tribe society. And so the idea of one who's just evil is so out there, it kind of goes against the whole racial makeup and cultural makeup. of what they
Correct.
are.
Yep. They're a very insular tribal society where essentially if someone went evil, everyone would outcast them and they would just all try and get rid of that one person because they went against what they would normally speak for.
And one thing I find kind of interesting with that is the Firbolgs and the Lizardfolk, in a weird way, they're both very, very tribal and could come to similar conclusions, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
The Firbolg, you protect your tribe because you protect your tribe. There's connections, there's caring there, there's the wisdom of seeing strength comes together from years and years. From the Lizardfolk, well, if there's 3 of us, we're going to die. But if there's 10 of us, we can go bully that smaller tribe over there and thus survive.
Right.
And so somehow through sheer calculation with no emotion and with emotion, you kind of get to the same place.
Right. Yeah. It's your pure community tribe versus your pure survival tribe.
Yep.
That could honestly be in the exact same forest depending on the layout. The things that Firbolgs do that lean back towards the Fae for people who want to play more of that Fae trickster version.
Which is very easy to see happening.
It is, especially you're the mysterious man or woman of the woods.
Yeah.
Like you are that old folklore person. They have the ability to do detect magic and disguise self once per long rest. Their disguise self is actually special. It lets them be up to 3 feet shorter instead of the same size so that you can look like a normal person rather than a, Tarzan giant man.
Or even be bordering on like a tall halfling.
Exactly. If you're a short Firbolg, you could be a tall halfling. They also have the ability to use an ability called Hidden Step, where they can go invisible until the start of their next turn, unless they were to attack or have someone make a save. To do that Forest Batman kind of thing, where someone could be talking to you and then you're just gone when they turn around. And their most interesting ability is that every Firbolg has the innate ability to talk to animals, but not Dr. Dolittle style. You can talk to them and they will understand you, but you will not necessarily understand them back. With that, it gives you an advantage on all charisma checks to influence animals, from a bird to a fish.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about the Firbolg you played, No Name, was he was so wise, but in really, really weird ways. Like, in some ways, he had no concept of how magic worked. He just kind of knew he had it, and therefore it must be tied to nature. And I found that kind of an interesting way to play that, because in certain ways he was wise, and others the whole party just kind of turned and looked at him.
Yep. You would, if you were out in the woods, he would suddenly be this master of everything. If you dropped him in a city, he would not understand why everyone asked him what he was doing. Because he assumed that you knew, because that's why he was here. The big thing about how you think when you're a Firbolg is that nature, everything is tied to nature, and nature is constantly a balancing act.
Yep.
Nature is not necessarily good or evil, but you influence nature in everything that you do. Firbolgs very much don't directly want to influence nature. So it's one of those, like, if there's a fire, they're going to try and save everyone they can, but they're not necessarily trying to put out the entire fire because they understand that that's part of nature.
Lightning hits, the fire starts. It's necessary to let the other trees grow. Yeah.
Correct. You can stop as much devastation as you can without actually understanding that you can't stop everything. The other big thing is understanding that take what you need from nature, but not in excess. Only eat what you need. Don't kill for sport. That kind of thing. Like they're use the whole animal kind of race, where they understand that animals eat each other for reasons linked to survival. It's part of nature, but don't do more than you need to. With that, greed is the biggest no-no for them.
Yeah.
If you find a greedy Firbolg, you have found a Firbolg that no other Firbolg wants to talk to. It makes for an interesting party dynamic. Because obviously they understand, wealth and things
Yeah.
like that. But an example of No Name was he constantly had the most money in the party because he didn't spend it on anything he didn't need at the time. And party members would need something and he would just give out money. Because you need this now, I don't. Here you go.
And I remember a great conversation in game. You need to buy heal potions. Why? I'm not injured right now. And it just went to the core of who the character was. I don't need this right now, so why should I spend the money now? And aside from being hilarious, as you were actually somewhat trolling the player as well, it played into the character perfectly, where in certain types of wisdom, very high, and others, like the looking ahead to diving into a cave. Well, I have spells, I'm not injured, why do I need a heal potion now?
Correct. Other people might need this. It's another thing too, as well. If you can't heal, then I could see why you would need this. So,
Yeah.
Having a druid or a ranger, anything that they would generally lead into that are very self-sufficient classes,
Makes a lot of sense.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They very much lead themselves into obviously nature, since that's their entire background. But they also, anything that is more of a support or an ability to stay hidden or do things from behind without people really needing to interact with you directly are things they're very interested in.
Yeah, and that makes sense with kind of the whole family and background dynamic that, well, this is my family or group or tribe for now, so as a support class, it makes a lot of sense. And whereas, kind of going back to the Lizardfolk a bit, I'll actually, because they're so tied to their alien nature, I'm going to go a little bit into an example of how that might work, and then right into the classes that make sense for them. Because I think most people think, I know my first thought with Lizardfolk was barbarian, but there's actually a very good reason that doesn't make sense. And so one of the things is, if you're struggling with the logical side of how the Lizardfolk works, one example, modifying the old philosophical question for D&D terms. There's an out-of-control carriage. If you don't do anything, it's going to hit a youngling. If you interfere, it's going to swerve and then hit two adults. So which decision do you make? The reason in real life, the real version of that's a good philosophical question is there's no clear right answer.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be a suffering, there's always consequences. As mammals, we know this. That's what makes it such a heart-wrenching thing to even think about. But the response from like a Lizardfolk character I play would be, is there a famine? And why would that matter? Well, if there is no famine, you do absolutely nothing. Because the youngling has not proven it can help the tribe, certainly not as much as two adults can. So logic, for the good of the tribe, when there's no emotion there, that makes sense. If yes, there is a famine, you interfere so it kills the two adults. Because then that's not only two less mouths to feed, but you have more food for everyone else who's there.
And the youngling eats less.
Yes, and if you're a human, you're like, if someone said that in real life, you'd be like, you're a sociopath. I'm backing away slowly.
Yep.
From a pure logic standpoint, though, you can't disprove that from logic. And that's the thing. The reptile person, the lizard person, is not evil. But since he just has to make the cold calculation about survival, that makes sense. One way it had described to me was, it's kind of like Mr. Spock, except it seems way darker because you don't have that human institution you grew up in. And so when you think of that, you can still use that type of thinking to come to morally good answers, but you have to do it through a practical logic. The Lizardfolk, well, I could kill this weakling who has what I want, but then the fearsome armored beings in all these cities would attack, and that would not be good. So I will not bully this person I could bully. And it's like, well, that's a weird way to get to don't attack the person you contemplate stealing from, but the logic gets you there. This party is strong, so while I could eat my fallen comrade, boy, that's deja vu, isn't it?
Right.
If they bring him back, maybe there'll be more food in the future. And for quirks, the quirks you can do with this could be really fun. Since they're lizards, well, you really understand the bigger lizard can eat me, the smaller lizard can't. So maybe it admires or the equivalent of admires a dragonborn too much to attack, because that lizard's twice as big as me. That's a threat. I should not attack him. It might see dragons as so fearsome, you just cannot convince them to attack a dragon, because that's foolish. That's how you get your tribe eaten.
Right, you run into a dragon or a dinosaur and you go, well, I should instinctively be leaving because that's bigger than
Where's
me.
the nearest cover where it cannot attack me? And that's how it scrambles. And one thing I would love is if a party tries to say you have to do something, but they're using moral issues, that is a fun time to get the inner 4-year-old in you as a Lizardfolk. Why? Well, we have to do this to save the kingdom. Why? Because we will be rewarded with gold. Why does gold matter? If we do this, you will never run out of food or shelter again. Oh, we should do this then. Because that makes sense.
Gold can be exchanged for goods and services.
And I find this interesting because some of the classes that I would have initially thought Lizardfolk would be a good build for, and admittedly, part of this is I'm a stickler for story. As a DM and as a player, I want it to make sense. Well, if you don't feel any emotion, how can you be a barbarian? Because you can't rage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a workaround, because they do have a thing called Feeding Frenzy, and you could work with the DM to say there is a big frenzy, but I do feel like at that point, you should have to justify that with the DM.
You have to go into the Frenzied Berserker more, which we all know is less controllable than our standard Barbarian.
Exactly.
You don't really want to take it, but for the character, it would make a lot more sense.
It would create that double-edged sword where this is usually a good thing, but oh man, if you walk into a tavern and they are cooking the roast and someone bumps into them, maybe he has to roll a save not to rage at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would be the time to Feeding Frenzy. Paladins, because how can you have a higher calling when it's survival and service? Same reason for clerics. I just don't see a wizard folk studying books as a wizard for long periods of time, because the logic to make that jump. That's not to say that a creative build couldn't do that. But, if you're a lizard folk who is going to be a magic caster, it's either sorcerer or warlock. Because a warlock does make sense. It can understand, I will be much stronger and do things that others can't. This makes sense.
And if you're leaning on the divine side, you're probably leaning more towards a druid.
Yep.
Or if you do play a cleric, you're probably playing him more like a shaman-style cleric.
Exactly. A very tribal or base survival or base area type thing, as opposed to a god, a higher belief, a standard of beliefs. Obviously, for classes it works well. They make rogues all day long into next week. They make good fighters all day long into next week. They do very much have the ability to be a ranger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, those are the classes that jump to my head instantly when I actually think of the Lizardfolk.
Which are very similar to how a Firbolg works. With their sort of dryad style, obviously your main Firbolg class, and I'm sure everyone knows more than one famous one, is Druid. Druid is what they lean right into of any flavor you want to put them in. Because they don't necessarily need to be a deep woods. They can be, Firbolgs of the jungle, Firbolgs of the tundra, wherever.
The great grass plains.
Exactly. Wherever you can find them, and they're able to really just dig themselves in and care for the land. With that, obviously, Rangers lean step 2 right after that. Another thing that's very common with Firbolgs is fighters. Just because, guards that it's still more disciplined kind of community where you're training each other.
And with the long 500-year life, you understand that there are going to be threats you have to deal with. And so a Firbolg fighter, I'm strong, I have the ability to defend my family, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. Well, and a real thing that would be that's fun to do with a Firbolg fighter is that you don't necessarily need to be your standard sword and board fighter there, where you can play with your pole arms or your axes or your throwing styles, anything that you think would be an interesting build for it. I will always secretly have a love for the Firbolg Nature Cleric. It's one of my favorite ways to play them, as you know.
Yeah.
Wow. It's generally not as common, but if you flavor it more of that shaman, where it's more of an ideal rather than just a god, leans into it perfectly.
Yeah, very much so.
It gives you all that fun flavor, and you can go whatever direction with it. Anyone who's played a cleric or is interested in a cleric knows a cleric can get built as an old man who runs around slowly helping the needy, or as my cleric was, where healing was only necessary when you were already dying. Otherwise, he was going to be standing on the front line hitting things with a stick with everybody else. Elves are also in that same kind of tree area, depending on how you want to build them. Wizards are uncommon, but it's your standard magic caster would be a wizard, because of that community network with elves.
Yeah, which makes sense.
You could build it however you wanted. Technically, you don't have to build them into where they knew elves, but elves would likely be, if anyone the Firbolgs are going to talk to, it's going to be elves.
Yeah, they both have kind of that Feyish deep woods background, which, and the long age and temperament makes them natural allies.
Exactly. Friends. Even if there aren't elves from where you want to come from, it's very likely your elders knew some in their period of time. They build well into rogues, obviously, with their fancy little tricks, and it does work well in the actual race, since they're very much liking to be hidden. Your rarities, which are also surprising, would be a barbarian.
Yeah.
Because barbarians are much more loner. They're not very lawful. Even a neutral barbarian would still be a rarity.
Yeah.
Mind you, you could still do it. You can play whatever you want. And if you're going to play a barbarian, I would expect you to lean on it more of a Norse character, where
that makes sense.
You respect nature in some way. And in all honesty, a Firbolg can kind of lean into any kind of class you want, because that whole respecting and playing with nature can go anywhere you feel like. From your Ian Malcolm's Life Finds a Way to your Quint from Jaws knowing to respect that giant fish, because if you don't, it's going to eat you. You could really play a Firbolg as anything. It's just having to work it into your backstory a bit more. They still have that mammal, normal train of thought, unlike your Lizardfolk, where it's community-based. You could be the outcast if you want. Everyone loves a good outcast story.
Yeah.
But any way that you could build it into a tribe from a deep woods secret, maybe you're from the group of passed down actual dryad lineage to play with a fun sorcerer. But
yeah, and I think those are great examples. Firbolg is, your mind jumps to one or two backgrounds or classes, but they really are a very, very versatile race. One of the more so ones, I think, beyond obviously standard humans, which could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if they said, well, what about Warlock? Well, there are plenty of Warlocks that are from nature creatures or face spirits. So even then, that would be a natural fit for a Firbolg. And when I look at like Firbolgs and Lizardfolk, and even ones we did earlier, kind of like the Kenku and the Tabaxi, like with this, they give you an opportunity to have a lot of fun, whether it's the phrases of speech, the odd logic, the interacting with a society you're not familiar with. And remember that a little bit can go a long way. Like, I think sometimes the danger is going full granola druid hippie all the time, even when the Firbolg has been with the party for a year and has seen cities. Or being the Lizardfolk who you try to go so alien with it so consistently that it either becomes annoying or it's hard not to view it as evil because it's not adjusting logic.
Where your party has to treat you as essentially a crocodile that doesn't have a leash that has to come with them everywhere.
Yeah. And the thing is, a little bit goes a long way, and especially when you look for those moments where it's hilarious, odd, or awkward in funny ways, but doesn't necessarily cause a huge problem, maybe just the minor, oh, there's a scuffle and end as a result. And it might have cost you 20 gold, but the group is laughing over it. That's the type of opportunities you want to look for to really play into it. And even the I'm a loner for my group, if you go with an unconventional build, is not a bad thing. My Lizardfolk would probably be Kola, which in Dragonborn translates to Friends of Smoothskins. And the issue was his tribe was not good at the decision making, and so they kept losing half their members each year. And so he found these smoothskins who then in the morning while spying their camp put on all these fake scales because they wanted to be lizards like him. And so he found that, rather charming as much as a lizard folk had found that, introduced himself, and that's how he found his adventuring party because they were all obviously putting on chainmail to be more lizard-like, but I already have it, so here we go. Here's my new tribe that might not get eaten every spring because they keep attacking the same giant crocodile who doesn't die.
Right? Or my no-name, the Firbolg, who walked into the party clad in full plate mail with antlers on top, where the first question asked to him is, "Why aren't you wearing armor made of wood?" And he went, "Because metal is tougher." Because he had learned through the raising of his village that maybe not all their ideas were the best. So off he went to learn how to work on spreading nature in places where it was being raised by people stronger than him.
And as a nature cleric, one of the things I really enjoyed was you told me when I was DMing, he worships nature as God. Like, not a God. It's nature. He might be worshipping God. I'll let you decide if you want to mess with me. He might not be worshipping any individual. And so there'd be things like he would have random bag, not the bag of holding.
A bag of tricks.
Bag of tricks.
Yeah, the bag of tricks.
And he'd throw out 3 animals each day because he wanted to increase the population. And no matter how many times they tried to explain it to him, he did not get the idea of constructs or that those animals disappeared after 24 hours. He thought he was populating the world with more helpful animal friends.
Yeah, because they went off and they were free.
Yeah.
You never saw any of them disappear, and it was a great party foil and something for you to play with as the DM, because every time one of them ever died in combat, they died in a way that we never saw the body.
Yeah.
Or they had just lived and he would just, at the end of the combat, just go, "Be free," and since you can command them, they would just leave.
Until they disappeared. So.
Yep, wizards and sorcerers yelled at him every day, and he didn't care because they were clearly wrong. That's not how animals work.
But in 2 years of playing, they never found a situation where they could prove the animal disappeared, and it was fantastic.
Yep.
I mean, I suppose they could have used it as spell magic, but they didn't think of that, so...
They didn't, I don't think they ever had the heart after that one time someone ate Friend Goat and he went on a rampage, so...
And that also brings us to a good final point, kind of wrapping it up. In Firbolgs, and this is not throwing shade at Critical Role, because I love the series, Pumont Solo was an awesome NPC Firbolg, and I don't remember who... Caduceus is fantastic character player. But I think sometimes when you watch a show, you get really tuned into that's how you play this. And that's a way to play the species and the race. And you should not feel completely logged in that small area. Because I'd say No Name, who, that was his name, because why do you need a name? I'm just me.
Correct.
Was such a different character from those. And yet clearly a Firbolg and such a quality part of the campaign. And we definitely want to encourage you when you try some of these other races. If anything else, just use that as a starting point from what you see others do, and then do your own thing, because some really, really cool characters can come out in that combination.
Right, draw inspiration, but don't feel like you have to, just because it's the thing that they are most set up for, their whole story is written for it. Feel free to play with it and make your twist on it. All of us 90s, 2000 kids all know about the drows with 2 scimitars that everyone always saw. You don't have to build them all that way.
Yeah. And it's one of those where they're an example, not necessarily an outline. And honestly, these are 2 character races who I cannot wait to get a chance to play more of both of them in the future.
I would love to see more of each at my own tables.
I will see what I can do. So, alright, so that's it for us. So, please subscribe if you haven't already. Definitely take a look at some of our other videos, and in the comments, give us your best stories. Who is your favorite Firbolg? Who is the Lizardfolk who caused trouble? Was it hilarious? Was it annoying? What are your stories, and what have you learned? What would you suggest or add to the list we gave? So, definitely keep these great characters alive at the table, and until next time, good gaming, everyone.
Bye-bye!
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.